In the book of the Revelation, Yeshua reveals to John a direct quote from Daniel chapter 12. And at that time shall Michael stand up, the great prince which standeth for the children of thy people. And there shall be a time of trouble such as never was since there was a nation even to that same time. And Yeshua also quotes that, and it is recorded in the Gospel of Matthew.
Wow, Michael. I mean, I hear that, especially coming when I read that in Daniel, and I say, and I read it in the Hebrew there in the original of Daniel, and I'm like really realizing, so what I read about in history in the Holocaust, they're in the future from what Daniel, if I understand Daniel correctly, there's going to be a time that's worse than what people experienced in the Holocaust. Mm-hmm. And I think this was why it's so important for us to understand what happened in history so that when it happens in the future, we have some perspective of what's going on. We were talking in the last segment, Michael, about this rabbi at Yad Vashem who was quoted at Yad Vashem as saying the Shema with his congregation. And I was looking for the source to that to find out, is that true? Did that really happen? And I found out there was these caches of documents called the Scrolls of Auschwitz, which were buried in the human ash after the Jews were burned. Let me read you from one of those diaries. It was written by a Sonderkommando. This was one of the Jews who was pressed into slavery. And if you want to understand what this means, there's a movie, which is one of the most difficult movies I've ever seen. It's called Son of Saul. And it was actually a Hungarian movie. And it is, I read the Scrolls of Auschwitz and then saw the movie. And I realized that movie, the script for that movie was essentially the Scrolls of Auschwitz, right? They took these scrolls and they said, what would this look like in a dramatic visual presentation? And it brings to life what you're reading. So here's what Zalman Grodowski wrote in a scroll that was hidden away in the pile of ash on September 6, 1944. He said, "Dear finder, search all the grounds. Buried in them are dozens of documents, mine and those of others, which cast light on all that has happened here." So these Jews who were being murdered, they were being pulled off trains, and there was what was called the selection. They said, these Jews go to death, these Jews go to work detail, and some of the Jews sent to the work detail literally had to that day or the next day pull the bodies of their wives and daughters and sons out of the gas chambers and put them in the ovens. That's literally described. Horrific beyond our imagination. And what Daniel describes is there will be in the future a worse day, so we better be prepared for that. The Jew who was a Sonderkommando, there was another one named Leib Langfuss, and he's the one who recorded the story of the rabbi. It turns out it was true. The rabbi really did say the Shema with his congregation. And let me read you some of the things that Leib Langfuss wrote. On November 25th, 1944, he writes, "I would request that my various writings of the past, signed with the initials, etc., buried in jars and boxes in the courtyard of crematorium number 2. Crematorium was where they burned the bodies. Be collected, as well as the 2 larger writings, etc." So he wrote a whole bunch of documents, and most of these have never been found. And the Polish government won't allow people to go and excavate there. The ones that were found were either found immediately after the war, after the Holocaust, when the Soviets arrived and there were people who came, and I'll be honest with you, Michael, a lot of the people who found these documents were looking, they knew the Jews had been murdered there, and they were some of the local Polish population who thought, well, maybe the Jews buried some gold. And instead of finding gold, they find these diaries. And one of the questions I had is, these Jews are in concentration camps. They know they're going to be killed. Where do they get pen and paper to write? And I found out the answer. What happened is these Jews would come and they were told to bring their property with them, right? Bring as much stuff, bring all your valuables, because you're just going to a work detail, right? Everything will be fine. And then they would bring their stuff, and they would be told to undress, go in the gas chambers, told they were getting a shower and be killed. Well, then the Sonderkommando would come and collect their stuff, bring it to the processing plant, so these things could be taken back to Germany. And some of the things were smuggled out. They actually smuggled out a camera. We have 2 or 3 surviving photographs from the actual operation of Auschwitz, the burning of the bodies. And that is from some man who we don't even know his name. He's a Greek. He was known as the Greek, and he smuggled a camera from this property processing plant and took a photo of the burning of the bodies. Many of the people apparently smuggled these diaries and wrote down what was happening. So we have firsthand accounts of people who knew they were going to be killed, and this is the only thing that would survive, is this testimony for future generations. And Leib Langfuss was killed, we know, on November 26, 1944. This is his last entry. In fact, I want to show people here. They can see here on this page, on the side there is written a quick note that he added in Yiddish, in his diary, and it says, "We are now going to the sauna." Sauna was the euphemism for the gas chamber. The 170 remaining men, we are convinced that they're taking us to our death. They have selected 30 men to remain in crematorium number 4. Today is 26 November 1944, and he was right. He was taken to the gas chamber and killed, and one of those 30 surviving people who were set aside to then clean up the bodies of the Sonderkommando must have hidden his diary somewhere, and today it's been found. He wrote a series of accounts which are called the Particulars. And it's really interesting because this is a man who's highly literate. He's clearly very expressive. And by the way, these documents are written in all kinds of languages. There's one written in Greek. There's one written in, there's a bunch written in Yiddish, in Polish. There's documents written. There's even a passage written in English by a little girl who was sent to her death, and some of her writings have survived. She apparently had family in England, and she must have spent some time in England, and so she could write in English. Because most of these things I'm reading in translation, but reading it in English, it's very, very powerful. So this is a translation from the Yiddish. He writes, end of summer 1944, a transport arrived from Slovakia. Transport means a train of Jews. The arrivals knew without a doubt that they were being taken to their death. Nevertheless, they were calm. They undressed and entered the bunker. Bunker was the gas chamber. As they were leaving the dressing room and entered the gas chamber, a woman said, "Maybe a miracle will still happen to us." Imagine these people are, they know what's happening. Yeah. There's no question at this point. These people know they're about to be murdered in a gas chamber, and they still have the hope for a miracle. And a miracle didn't happen. She died. But that hope is so deeply rooted in the heart of every Jew who has faith that God can do anything. He's the one who split the sea, and if it is his will, he can save them from a gas chamber. And so this woman going to her death, she still has faith. And I find inspiration in this, Michael. I find knowing that what Daniel 12 described is going to happen one day, I have this hope, hope of the miracle.
Let me read that. I'll continue on.
Yeah.
And at that time, thy people shall be delivered, every one that shall be found written in the book. He's talking about the resurrection.
The book of life and the resurrection.
That's
Read
right.
the next
That's
verse,
right.
Michael, Daniel
Okay.
12:2, because that's the key verse of resurrection for most Jews.
And many of them that sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, some to shame and everlasting contempt. And they that be wise shall shine as the brightness of the firmament, and they that turn many to their God shall shine as the stars forever and ever and ever and ever.
And look, Michael, those 2 or 3 verses in a nutshell are the Jewish experience of experiencing incredible suffering followed by redemption. And just to point to the Holocaust, what followed the Holocaust was the rebirth of the state of Israel. And the war that led that from which Israel was born is often referred to as Israel's War of Independence. But many Jews in Israel who went through that and lived through that call it the War of Resurrection. Because they literally see the death of the Jewish people, I guess not literally, they metaphorically see the death of the Jewish people in the Holocaust. One out of 3 Jews are murdered. And then 3 years after this, the state is reborn through this war which was a war of annihilation. And that time there was a deliverance. But to me, this is a picture of the things that are to come based on what we read in Daniel. And I think it's important for us to know what this is. And I actually gave a talk about this that I videoed. It's on my website. Like I said, it's called The Lost Scrolls of Auschwitz on nehemiaswall.com. But I presented this at a university for their Holocaust Memorial Day. And afterwards, I had dinner with the president of the university. And he said, "Nehemia, you know what I took away from your talk?" He said, "When you squeeze the toothpaste, you see what comes out. And when the Jews were squeezed, what came out was their profound faith and love of God." Many of them died. 6 million died, a third of all Jews. But in that moment, They showed their true faith when they were tested. I want to read some more of this from Leigh Blancfuss's diary. I think we're, in a sense, Michael, we are sharing the testimony of this man who died and honoring his memory. This man who knew he was going to be killed and did his best and shared this information so generations to come would know. Another group of Jews had arrived from Tarnov. This is in his Leigh Blancfuss's diaries, the Lost Scrolls of Auschwitz. One of the young people sat on a bench and asked for everyone's attention. A deathly silence prevailed. "My young Jewish brothers," he called out, "do not believe that they are taking you to your death. It is unthinkable that this can happen to us, that tens of thousands of innocent men will be put to death. Such cruel and shocking slaughter could never happen in this world. Those who told you those things must have had their reasons. It's a conspiracy theory. The man's in the antechamber, stripped naked, about to be marched into the gas chamber, and he's telling his fellow Jews, guys, calm down. Don't believe the crazy conspiracy theories. Those are wackos who have some agenda. That's why they're telling you the Nazis are going to kill us all." He goes on, Leigh Blancfuss, who knew it was going to happen. He continued to speak until he had calmed down. Only when the gas was thrown into the bunker did the preacher with the well-developed conscience awaken from his dream of innocence. The pretext that he had used to calm his brothers were shown to be mere illusion and self-deception. And Michael, as we approach these end times, and I believe they're coming, I don't know when, but I know they're coming, I believe that, we better get out of our illusion and self-deception, because there are people, oh, you've got nothing, oh, that's just conspiracy theory, oh, you have nothing to worry about, everything will be fine. You know, that's what Jeremiah talked about, the false prophets who came and they would say, shalom, shalom, there is peace, there's peace. And Jeremiah says, ve'en shalom, and there was no peace. Because people, they want to believe the feel-good message. They don't want to know and hear that bad things are going to happen. So the man literally about to be marched to his death, he was essentially he's stripped naked and he's about to be killed. He's preaching, oh, everything's going to be fine until the gas comes in and kills him. And we know that because Leigh Blancfuss knew he was going to be killed and he recorded it in his diary, which was hidden in these ashes or somewhere. He goes on, end of summer 1943. And bear in mind, this is an eyewitness who day in and day out, he's pulling bodies out of the gas chamber. And when he can, he sneaks away and he writes it's interesting because he was actually a rabbi, or what's called a dayan, and a rabbinical judge, and he's described by some of the others under commando in their diaries. And they describe how he would go and he would weep every night for all the Jews who were murdered and for the books that were burned. And this was a man who, we don't know how he survived. Like, how does anybody survive such tragedy? So he writes, end of summer 1943, there was a transport of Jews from Tarnov. They inquired where they were being taken. They were told they would be liquidated, meaning killed. They were already standing naked. A heavy, serious mood overtook them. They became lost in thought and whispered the vidui for the sins of the past. Michael, vidui is the Jewish prayer of confession. And I want to read you this prayer. This is a prayer that I grew up praying every year. You read it on Yom Kippur and you read it in other times of the year. It's a prayer that certainly all Orthodox Jews would know the core part of it by heart. When I was researching this, I'm like, oh, vidui, ashamnu, bagadnu, gazalnu, dibalnu dofi. I didn't need to look it up, right? At least the main part of the prayer I remember from my childhood, even though I haven't prayed this prayer in decades. I'm a Karaite Jew now, but growing up, I remember this prayer. Let me read you what it says. We are not so arrogant and stubborn as to declare before thee that we are holy, righteous, and without sin. This is the vidui, the confession a Jew says on Yom Kippur and before he dies. Surely we have sinned, we have offended, we have betrayed, we have robbed, and we have spoken basely. Now, when we recite that list of sins, it's a long list of sins, and this is just something my experience growing up. We would say ashamnu, bagadnu, gazalnu. You beat your chest as you're doing it. Dibalnu dofi. Hevinu vehoshanu, zadnu, chamasnu, tafalnu sheker. And it's a long list of sin. We've done these sins. We're not innocent. We're asking God to accept our confession. And of course, years later, when I read the New Testament, I read this and I'm like, yeah, I know what that is. And it was interesting. I would talk to Christians and people who are trying to live according to the way Yeshua lived, people who were returning to their Hebrew roots. And they would ask me, what does this mean? I'm like, well, what do you mean what does it mean? It's the vidui. This is part of life. You confess your sins before God. This is Luke 18, 9-14. I won't read the whole thing.
Man beating his chest
That's right.
and crying out.
That's right. The Pharisee standing by himself was praying thus, God, I thank you that I am not like other people, thieves, rogues, adulterers, or even like this tax collector, right? That's not what the Pharisee is supposed to say. Even by Pharisee standards, that man is an arrogant sinner. And the tax collector standing far off would not so much as raise his eyes to heaven, but beat his breast, saying, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. So even the Pharisees, this Pharisee in Luke is a sinning Pharisee, even the Pharisees understood that you beat your chest and you ask God for forgiveness. Now, Michael, I want to get to the key passage. This is the passage that describes the rabbi who's going to his death, and he recites the Shema, and it's in the diary of Le Blancfus, and it's dated, Michael, Passover 1944. A transport arrived from Vittel in France, including several Jewish notables. One of them was the rabbi of Bayonne, the late Rabbi Moshe Friedman. So we know the man's name. He had been one of the great Jewish scholars of Poland, a truly rare patriarchal figure. Michael, here is his picture. This rabbi was known as Moshenu, our Moshe, our Moses. He was the leading rabbi of Eastern Europe before the Holocaust. And just to give you an idea of who we're talking about, there are thousands, tens of thousands of rabbis. This was a rabbi that any Jew in Europe would know who this rabbi was. It really is just imagine this image. In a Christian context, replace the name Moshe Friedman with Billy Graham. This is the Billy Graham of Judaism of that time. He's known to everyone as this leading figure, as this really uniting figure. He was a figure who united all the different factions of Judaism in love and as much as they could possibly get together. And there he is, stripped naked, about to be marched into a gas chamber. Rabbi Moshe undressed along with everyone else. Didn't matter who he was a Jew. He then addressed the Oberscharführer, that's the Nazi commander. Holding on to the lapel of his coat, he spoke to him in German. Do not think you will succeed in destroying the Jewish people. The Jewish people will live forever. The innocent blood you have spilled will be demanded with you. You will speak. He spoke with great emotion and great strength. Then when he had finished, he put on his hat. This is the hat showing him to be a rabbi, the rabbi hat. And in great excitement, called out, Shema Yisrael, Hear, O Israel. And all the Jews faithfully responded with him, Shema Yisrael, out of a sense of profound faith, which had surrounded them in all the last moments of their lives. It was a moment of supreme elevation. Michael, this is a Sonderkommando knowing he's going to be killed in the wee hours of the morning when no one's around. He has a stolen pen and a smuggled pad of paper, and he's writing this down so the generations to come will know what happened in those last moments. He says it was a moment of supreme elevation such as may be encountered but once in a lifetime, proving the eternal nature of Jewish spiritual resistance. Michael, when I started this investigation, I didn't know if this was a fable or if it was a true story. Michael, here is the page in the diary of Le Blancfus that was uncovered from Auschwitz, the actual page where he describes it. And now I'm going to show here, you can see, even if you aren't fluent in Hebrew, it's actually written in Yiddish, but some of the words are Hebrew. You can see the words twice, Shema Yisrael, Shema Yisrael, Hear, O Israel. They're right there, Michael. You can see them in the documents. Everyone watching this can see this is a true story, that this rabbi proclaimed the Shema in the last moment. I want to tell you why, and I know we're running out of time, so I want to quickly explain to you why he did this. There was a rabbi after the war who described his experience where he was approached by another rabbi who said, I know I'm going to be killed. What blessing do I make just before I die? And he told him the blessing to make. And it's, blessed art thou, Lord, King of the universe, who sanctified us with his commandments, commanding us to love the awesome and honorable name of the one who is, and the one who was, and the one who future will be. And Michael, that is the meaning of the name Yehovah. Hayah, Hoveh, Yehiyeh, he who was, he is, who is to come, who will be. That is the name that appears in the Hebrew sources. And just really quickly, when you take those, and I have a teaching on this called The Great I Am Revealed. Don't have time to get the whole thing. But when you take those three words, Hayah, Hoveh, Yeh, he was, he is to come, he will be. you get Yehovah. Those three forms of the verb together combine the name Yehovah. Of course, you have this in the book of Revelation. I talk about that in the study, Revelation 4:8, 1:4, etc. This idea of he was, he is to come, he will be. So the last words and the breath of the dying Jew as he's being murdered, for no other reason that he's God's chosen people, for no other reason that he is a Jew in covenant with the creator of the universe, is praising the name of the one who was, is, and who will be, of that name, Yehovah.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we didn't get anywhere near what we were intending to do today. This is a stream of spiritual consciousness that you are participating in. And this is what it's like. When I have Nehemiah over, this is what I look forward to be ministered to spiritually, and it is always a spiritual event. And now, in closing, Nehemiah, if you would close with the prayer.
Michael, I want to say the prayer that these Jews in the Holocaust and going back hundreds of years, the prayer of the Jewish martyr that they prayed. This is recorded in the book of a 16th century rabbi, and it was recited in the Holocaust. And there it says, when a persecution takes place, let him say the vidui, the confession. My God and God of my fathers, I have sinned. I have offended. I have betrayed. Behold, the time has arrived for my life to be taken from me and to deliver it into your hand for the sanctification of your unique name. Shema Yisrael, Yehovah Eloheinu, Yehovah Echad. Amen.
Amen. Well, Shabbat Shalom. Have a good Sabbath. Shavua Tov. Have a good week. And we'll see you back here for a continuation of the story next week. You don't want to miss this.